Hi again! I'm back to talk about multiculturalism versus colorblindness, and you can tell I'm recording this right after the other one because I'm wearing the same shirt. I strongly encourage you to watch last week's video before continuing on with this week's video. I'll make a link available very efficiently for you. I'll make it as easy as possible, but get the full rundown on what the difference between colorblindness and multiculturalism is, and we'll pick up from there. If you're ignoring me and you need a summary, basically colorblindness is a way of thinking about diversity that focuses on making sure everyone is treated exactly the same and ignoring group differences. Multiculturalism is another approach to diversity that says the best way to navigate a diverse society is to embrace the differences that people bring to the table. Most of the psychological research seems to hint at colorblindness being a less than optimal strategy, but multiculturalism seems to do some good things. But what we're going to talk about this week is that multiculturalism is not perfect either. The first thing to understand is that multiculturalism is not a perfect answer to all of the things that can be challenging about navigating a diverse society. So on the one hand, yes, it's true that multiculturalism is associated with less prejudice compared to colorblindness, but it's also associated with slightly more stereotyping. After all, if you're attending to and really making sure you acknowledge the groups that people come from and the qualities that might be associated with those groups, it can be somewhat easier to stereotype in ways that you may not intend. The other challenge related to multiculturalism runs a little deeper, and a lot of this draws from research from Victoria Plout and her colleagues. The gist is that multiculturalism can seem to exclude people in a majority group. In other words, when multiculturalism and diversity initiatives are so focused on acknowledging and embracing group differences, celebrating minority experience, it can seem to alienate majority group members. Now, you might think, well, tough, deal with it. But the problem is that in order for these kinds of initiatives to make change, everybody's got to be on board with them. So how can we know that this is a challenge, and what might we do about it? So a bunch of good research seems to show that white participants view multiculturalism as exclusionary. Some tasks have white participants pairing multiculturalism ideas with a sense of exclusion, and they find that whites pair those two concepts together more closely than non-white participants do. The other thing we know about this issue is that when white participants are faced with multiculturalism, they connect that idea less to a sense of themselves than do racial minority groups. And the issue there is also that when white participants distance themselves from multiculturalism, they're also tending to be less supportive of general diversity initiatives. So what do we do about this? How can we maximize the usefulness of a multicultural approach to diversity? Well, the answer seems to be in what Plout and colleagues are calling all-inclusive multiculturalism as sort of a next step in the phase of diversity ideology. The idea here is to be very clear that when we talk about diversity and multiculturalism, we are talking about everybody, that all groups bring something to the table. It's not just that minority groups bring something to the table in diversity contexts, it's that every group brings something unique to the table, and that includes European American backgrounds. So what they've done is they've had white participants either read about multiculturalism through the default narrative that's often used to describe diversity in ways that we've seen can seem to exclude whites from the dialogue, but they also created a version of that description that was very clear about the fact that all-inclusive multiculturalism means that even European American backgrounds bring something unique to a table. In those cases, they find that white participants are less threatened and show less of this negative reaction to multiculturalism as an initiative. So bringing all of this together, it seems that even though multiculturalism tends to be slightly better than colorblindness as a worldview that promotes real, genuine diversity and positive outcomes of it, it still isn't perfect under its sort of broad definition. We saw that in some cases multiculturalism could provoke more stereotyping, so it's not a perfect solution, but we also saw that it can imply exclusion of majority group members who may feel like although they embrace diversity, that their group is now being left out of the conversation. So rather than move along and say, well, there's no such thing as finding a solution to this question, researchers say, well, let's tackle the problem. Let's find the root cause of what's going on between not accepting a multicultural diversity perspective and address it. And when we do, we find more positive outcomes. So a hopeful message after all. That does it for this week. Next week I'll be back with something else, and I promise I'll be wearing a different shirt. See you then. For more social psychology, subscribe to this YouTube channel, or go to beapeopleexpert.com and find new articles every week about psychological science.